have been. In the Gospel of John, in the 19th chapter, one little verse. Verse 30 is what we're going to look at today. Speaking of Jesus, he's on the cross, and this is what it says. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Easter Sunday morning. It's a special day across our world. It's on the calendar. People all over our world are observing this day. Some make a special effort to be in church on this Sunday. Many of us have traditions that go back longer than we can remember about this day and the celebration of Easter. What a time. How special. Why? You ever stop to wonder why? Why has this time become so significant in so very, very many lives around the world? Truth is, at Easter, we remember a very barbaric and bloody event. It was an event that was filled with all kinds of falsehood and all kinds of inhumanity, injustice to the nth degree. A man called Jesus of Nazareth was crucified, one of the most cruel means of execution that was ever devised by mankind. That happened. We can verify that. We have outside resources, not just Christian, that tell us that. Today we come in recognition of that event. Today we come and we look at one phrase, 3 words that were spoken on that day. As that man, Jesus of Nazareth, the one many of us have come to know as Jesus Christ, hung on the cross, at one point before he died, he said these 3 words, "It is finished. It is finished. It is finished." Those words capture my heart and reverberate in my mind. Maybe they do yours. Scholars tell me they're not a sad word. It's not a defeatist phrase. It's not an "I give up" phrase. Instead, scholars say it's a shout of acclamation, and what he's really saying is, it is accomplished. It's done. It's accomplished. It is finished. Let's look at that thought. And let's look at some of the things it might well have meant. It is finished. His ministry, it is finished. Jesus Christ is God's only begotten Son. He's not a fable. He's not a figment of the imagination. He's not something that somebody came up with under the inducement of drugs. He is God's only begotten Son. That's a fact. We understand from God himself that Jesus Christ was with him before time began, and he's going to be with him throughout all of eternity. He is God's Son. Why then did he leave the glories of heaven? Why then did he set aside the glory that our eyes could not look upon and still live, and come here into our world? I'm going to suggest to you that there are several reasons, but the first one we want to look at, very high on his list, is for you and me. He wants to show us God. Why would that be necessary? Truth is, we struggle. All of mankind struggles to believe in and trust in a God that we cannot see, that we cannot physically hear with our ears, touch with our hands. And so Jesus came in human form that we might hear, that we might see, that we might touch him, that he might put aside all the falsehoods, all the myths, all the man-made gods that have been created since man came into existence, and show us God in a manner that we could best be able to understand, reveal himself, and reveal the power of God at work. Jesus came to teach us and to show us God and what he desires from his people. What is it God desires? He wants us to return good for evil. Thus, on the cross, dying, he said something else. He looked down at those that were mocking and ridiculing him, the soldiers that had nailed him to the cross, and then he said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they've done. Returning good for evil, to love the helpless. There was a day he was teaching, crowds gathered around, children started edging in. They do. No, one of the reasons I have a children's story, he gave me the example. What did he do? He said to his apostles, let the little children come to me, for such is the kingdom of heaven. Let them come. To love the helpless, to show compassion to the needy. 5,000 he fed one day, 3,000 another. He healed, he ministered, he cared, compassion. And to put God first. We fail on that all too often. There in the early days of his ministry, there in the wilderness of Judea, with Satan tempting him to do all kinds of things to get Satan's easy way, we often take his shortcut. Jesus looked at Satan and he said, you shall love the Lord your God and serve only him, and serve only him. What are we hearing here? We're hearing his words. It is finished. It is finished. His ministry in our midst was finally over. He'd walked in a manner we could see. He'd talked in a manner we could hear. And in all of that, he showed us God. He showed us God at work in all the different miracles that he created, be it calming the storm and the sea, be it walking on the water, be it raising the dead. In all things, Jesus showed us God in a way that we might understand. And then he said, it is finished. You have enough in a manner you can understand to see and know God. It is finished. I think it means more than that. It is finished. His atonement is finished. His atonement is finished. Why did Jesus come? I've asked that question, but I want to ask it again. I'll tell you why. Because those he had created and loved with a love beyond measure, you and me, and all the rest of our world, chose sin. From the very beginning, in the Garden of Eden, right up through today, chose sin. Now, our world makes light of sin, but this is what Jesus knew, and I'll show you how light he made of it. He knew the consequences. He knew the price for those he loved. Paul wrote in the 6th chapter of Romans, the 23rd verse, for the wages of sin is death. In the 3rd chapter, in the 23rd verse, he wrote, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Why did he come? He came because he knew that every living being throughout all of history, up through present day and time, sinned. And as a consequence, came under the penalty of it. That's why he came. So he came to make an atonement for you and for me. Do you want to know what an atonement is? An atonement is when a price is paid. An atonement is when a debt is paid. The Bible said that when he came and hung on that cross, he who knew no sin, nobody else can claim that. Nobody else can ever live their life without sin. He who knew no sin, he throughout all of time knew no sin, took upon himself every sin, every vile word, every filthy thought, every horrible action. And in doing so, he took what was slated for us to receive. He accepted upon himself all the consequences. He felt, worse than all, the unimaginable loss of separation from God. You and I don't really understand that, but he had never been separated from God. And there on the cross, he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Because he took upon himself sin and all of its consequences, and he died. Look at what he accepted. Look at what he accepted in accepting this consequence. He accepted all the agony that you and I can imagine. They lied about him. They perjured themselves about him. They arrested him illegally and got away with it. Made him the victim of injustice by trying and convicting him. They laughed, slapped at him. They beat him. They whipped him. They ridiculed him. And finally, he allowed them to crucify him. Now, I say he allowed. In John's 10th chapter, the 18th verse, Jesus said, "I have authority to lay down my life and authority to pick it up." In the Garden of Gethsemane, the night they arrested him, when the crowds came and Peter took a sword and cut off the ear of the high priest, and Jesus healed it and turned to Peter and he said, "Peter, don't you understand? If I wanted to," and he knew why they were coming for him and what was going to happen, "I could ask my Father and he would give me 12 legions of angels. 1,000 men comprised a Roman legion. 12 legions of angels. I have authority to lay down my life." He allowed all of this to happen. He allowed them to take him out and nail him on a cross. He allowed all those men, hypocrites, calling themselves priests and servants of God, to ridicule him and laugh at him and poke fun at him as he hung there on the cross. And then he bowed his head and said, "It is finished." And he died. And he died. You see, somebody had to. And the only way somebody could die for you or for me would be if that somebody was without sin and voluntarily chose to take your place and mine. It is finished. What is finished? His ministry is finished. His atonement for you and me is finished. What is finished? His redemption. Here's why we celebrate today. Finally, the door to eternity in heaven stands wide open. It's not closed down. It's not locked. The price of atonement has been paid. The sin has been forgiven. Redemption is complete. The Greek word for paid is paid in full. Guess what that means? That means nothing else is required. Nothing else can be done to receive salvation and all of eternity. There's not a thing you or I need to do to earn it. Paul wrote that in Ephesians in the 2nd chapter, verses 8 and 9. For by grace are you saved through faith, not of works. Not of works. The ledger for sin has been wiped clean. Now, if you're still listening, I want you to catch this point too. Just because the atonement has been made, just because redemption is there, doesn't mean, and this is contrary to most of our world's thoughts, so catch it, it doesn't mean everybody is going to go through that open door. Everybody is going to spend eternity in heaven. The door is open. The price has been paid. But you get to choose. Every living soul gets to choose. See, this is the thing about God. Unlike Satan, he doesn't force us. He loves us. He paid the price. He opened the door and he said, here, if you want it, walk through it. It's yours if you choose it. Why do you think we have this life? Why do you think we're here on this world, in this earth, and that we live our years, however short or long they are? It's because God in His mercy and His love wants to give every one of us a chance to choose. We don't have to. We've already sinned. We can continue to sin. We can turn down this marvelous gift, this work that is finished, and go our merry way into the dark side of eternity. Or we can choose. It's ours. It's finished, you know. He came, He showed us, He taught us, He revealed. He came, He paid the price. He allowed all of that to be done to Him that should be done to us. And He offered us redemption, forgiveness, eternity in heaven. You know how I know that? It's Easter Sunday morning. What happened on that first day of the week after His crucifixion? He rose. He rose. He who had died, He who all the city of Jerusalem and countless pilgrims there for that special Passover event saw, He who had died rose and appeared to many and now sits on the right hand of the throne of God. That wouldn't happen. We couldn't celebrate it unless God put His stamp of approval. So truly, it is finished. Now, what will you and I do about it? If you've never invited Him into your heart and your life, the very celebration of this day is lost for you because you don't have Him. If you're here and you are His and you're not walking, you've turned back into sin. If you're not walking with Him, don't you want to change that? We give an invitation. I give it especially on this Easter Sunday morning. I give an invitation if you haven't ever invited.